Hello everyone, and welcome to a One Controller Port quick play of Tiny Bullets for the PlayStation 1. This is a late title on the system, coming out in like 2000s, and it's kind of a 3D action platformer. In some ways it feels kind of in the vein of Zelda, but it differs in many ways as well. It's a first-party Sony title, and kind of the developer who's branded on this game is Contrail, although I couldn't 100% figure out if they were truly the developers who worked on this, or if it was a work of another team and they just kind of like supervised it. But for the people who were working on this game, you know, came from titles like Alundra 2 and Legend of Dragoon. So the people building this game definitely were, you know, familiar names at the time in terms of like Sony first-party support on the original PlayStation. This title did not get localized though, so this is a Japanese-only release. So in saying that, I don't really know what this title's about. You know, more or less how this game starts is you're this kid who kind of wanders into a dungeon. I believe he actually like falls into the dungeon. And he only has a slingshot as a weapon. So, you know, when I said it's kind of like Zelda earlier, it's very hands-off in terms of his combat. You're mostly doing ranged attacks, and you can do kind of like quicker shots up close, and it has like an auto aim to it. But that's not really the focus of this game. The focus is very much around other aspects, like in terms of exploring this dungeon and things like that, and the main character's tool set definitely feels more geared towards that. So there's different types of bullets you can get. There's like explosive bullets that do more damage. Then you can find various like bombs and dynamite that you can use to either, you know, explode onto enemies, or you can use it to actually like open up new paths and things like that. So it is very Zelda-like, where you're kind of figuring out, you know, where a lot of these items can be used in a dungeon and where it's most effective. You also have like potions for healing and things like that. And he weirdly enough has like this ground pound attack, which feels very out of place in this game. That's very, you know, focused on shooting things, and then you also can just like stomp on enemies' heads and things like that too. But more than anything, honestly, it's a platformer. You are exploring these dungeons, but there's a lot of, you know, climbing up, you know, jumping between various, you know, pillars, you know, climbing up, grabbing onto ledges, things like that. I saw somebody compare this game to Tomb Raider, and I've personally never played Tomb Raider, but I think I can kind of see it, and you could also kind of compare it in controls as well, because it's very tank control-ish in some ways. It's very stiff. You know, you kind of press up on the D-pad, and that makes your character run forward, kind of no matter which direction he's facing. Well, most of the time. There's actually like 2 different camera modes in this game. So there's a very like Resident Evil style fixed camera mode. It's not using pre-rendered background, so it's just like a fixed camera in the environment. But you know, you're controlling the character based off, you know, his own orientation without considering, you know, what the camera's doing. And then you can also change it to be kind of behind the back, you know, view. So you're playing more of a traditional third-person platforming in that way. But neither camera control scheme really fulfills every need. I found that when I was playing this game, I had to do a lot of like switching back and forth between them. I'd go into a room, kind of wouldn't know what to do when I was in like the behind the back camera, but then once I went back there with like the fixed camera, it's like, oh, okay, I got what I need to be doing with this game now. Like there's this switch up in the corner that I couldn't see when I had the camera behind me. But in that same way, like when you're using the fixed camera, there's a lot of times where you're just like running blindly down halls, and it's very easy to just like walk off a cliff without realizing it, because the game just doesn't really show you where you're going at times. So neither camera worked pretty well. So you gotta kind of like switch between them, and I think in a lot of ways people find, you know, the tank controls of the game also kind of awkward in a platformer. But I think it generally worked fine. It's just one of those things that you just kind of learn it, you know, from games of this era. There's a lot of, you know, experimentation in how a game should control and things like that. I'm guessing they probably did look at something like Tomb Raider and kind of built their control scheme off that. So while it's not quite what you expect from like a 3D platformer today, I think it's competent enough that it gets the job done. And so when you're using like this platforming, you're also doing a lot of exploring of the dungeon. It's largely linear, where you're kind of going between different sections of a dungeon. So it's like well, it's really one big dungeon, but you go like the different sections of this one big dungeon, and as you progress, there are like different paths you can kind of go down, and you'll find different like puzzle elements that will help you down another path. So there is like some exploration parts where you'll get like kind of stuck in a pocket of an area, and need to kind of work out what you need to do in that particular chunk of an area before you can move on to the next one. And as far as I can tell, for the majority of this game, you can actually backtrack like all the way back to the start. I'm not sure if you can go all the way back from like the end of the game to the very beginning, but you can go pretty far back. I actually had to go back and record some music for this this quick play, and I went back at least like 5 or 6 levels. So yeah, it's fairly open, but it's very linear when you're actually progressing on it. It does have like collectibles too, so like I was saying, where you could kind of like bomb walls and things like that. You can find a lot of hidden I think they're like green gems, and when you find these green gems, you can go kind of turn it in at these pillars, and then you get like an idol out of these pillars. And these green gems, I think, might unlock something at the end of the game. There's like this door at the end of the game that you can't open if you haven't done something. I'm gonna guess collect all the green gems. I'm not sure if that means you get like a different ending or something like that. I didn't go out of my way to actually collect all those green gems, but it seems like there's probably some incentive for you to kind of explore and figuring out where all these green gems are, and they seem to be locked per section of the game, so it's something that you can kind of figure out where you need gems from still, based off of what places still have a idol you haven't gotten an idol from, essentially. So it's pretty self-explanatory in that regard, and generally I find the game to be pretty accessible. If you can get over the controls, get over the camera, it's very easy to kind of get into. I think most of the puzzle solving is pretty straightforward, even if you don't speak Japanese, but there are some language barriers here and there. There's like very early on, there's this part where they kind of tell you to smash the floor open, but there's no like real visual indicator on the floor for you to smash it open, so it's kind of confusing because you're like, I don't know if I like, did I miss something? So if I would recommend, if you do decide to pick this game up, there's like a long play that's on YouTube. I would recommend just kind of following that if you get stuck. But spend the time looking around, spend the time poking your nose and figuring out if you can find what you need to do next. I think that's whenever it comes to like a Japanese game like this, it's a lot of the fun is exploring the environment and trying to figure out what you need to do. And then once you hit that point that you get a little bit of frustration, it's like, okay, let's look up to see what we can do online. And sometimes you don't need like a written guide, just like somebody having already beat the game and uploaded on the internet, you're good probably. So yeah, and overall, I will say, even though you can't understand the story, it's got a pretty, I don't know if cute aesthetic is the right word. It is cute. Like, the characters are very cute. You're this little Sonic the Hedgehog looking kid, and as far as I can tell, you're trying to go rescue this like mysterious girl, and both of you are these like big head children, and I actually really like the he's kind of like a mentor. His name's Quint, the only character I can remember the name of, Quint. But I actually like him a lot, and he seems like a very kind of, I don't know if Indiana Jones figure is the right word, very kind of adventure-y, kind of soldiery kind of thing. So it's a fun cast, but it does have a kind of a darker element to it. Mainly that, like, it seems like the story is kind of is about like these people or these like monsters transforming people into like vampire kind of creatures and things like that. And in the story being about that, there's definitely parts of the game that was maybe a little darker than I thought. There's one boss in particular that I was like, oh god, like when I opened the door and saw this like lady with a stake in her chest, basically, I was like, okay. Just didn't really expect that from this game. So it does get a bit darker, but very dark in that like playful, innocent kind of way. Not really in like a Resident Evil, we're trying to scare you kind of way. So in saying that, I think it's a really fun and charming game overall. It's very different feeling from like a, Nintendo collectathon kind of platformer that you would get on the Nintendo 64 with like Mario 64 or something like that. It is kind of a linear dungeon adventure kind of thing, but it is very focused on platforming, very focused on puzzle solving, things like that. So I would hesitate to like, compare it directly, but it's kind of like this nice mix of Mario and Zelda in some ways you could view it. Probably Tomb Raider is probably the real inspiration, but I just don't have the personal, context with Tomb Raider to really make that connection. But it is a bit cuter than Tomb Raider. So if you have more of a a feeling towards like Japanese aesthetics, maybe Tiny Bullets will be more up your alley. And I will say that, like, even though it's a little, you know, difficult here and there in terms of language barrier kind of things, one thing you can do with this game is use like a camera translation app. And the cutscenes have a black bar on the bottom when you see the text, so it actually makes it very easy for the text to be translated during the cutscene. But yeah, very fun game though, and I think it's well worth the play. It's pretty cheap too. I got mine for like $10, you know, it's pretty cheap. So you know, just keep an eye out for it on eBay or something like that. It's not an expensive game, very accessible, and I think it's really worth checking out. So that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneControllerPort.com is the website. I've reviewed quite a few other, like, I don't know if obscure is the right word, but I've played some more, you know, PlayStation 1 games that didn't come to America. Gun Gauge is definitely one of the ones. That actually came to Europe, though, so there's an English version of that. And then Aconcagua is kind of the big other one, which is a point-and-click adventure kind of thing, but it's also kind of segmented into pockets. So I think if you're looking for accessible Japanese imports, Aconcagua is definitely one to check out, so I'll link those two videos at the end of this. But anyways, thank you again for coming. OneControllerPort.com is the website. I hope you have a great week. Bye.